All right, let's talk about Spotify. I mean, it's a company that feels like it's just everywhere, right? On your phone, in your car. It's kind of the default. But here's the thing. What if its whole grand plan to take over the world of audio is not at all what we think it is? Okay, so let's jump right into what I'm calling the Spotify paradox. On one side of the coin, you have a company that is the undisputed king. We're talking 239 million subscribers. That's double the size of Apple Music. They are dominant. But then you flip that coin over, and get this. They've been around for 18 years, and in all that time, they have never, not once, actually been profitable for a full year. I mean, how is that even possible? And this is where the mystery gets even weirder. Just look at this growth chart. You've got Apple, you've got Amazon, you've got YouTube, literally some of the biggest, most powerful companies on the planet, all jumping into the streaming game. And what happened? It barely even made a dent. Spotify just kept on growing, totally unfazed. It's this unstoppable success that makes the fact they're not making any money just so confusing. So to really get our heads around this paradox, we have to dig into the fundamental problem that's right at the heart of their entire business model. And that brings us to our first section, caught in the middle. Okay, so you pay your monthly subscription, right? Well, here's where that money actually goes. For every single dollar that Spotify earns, about 63 cents, poof, it goes straight out the door to the record labels. You've got just 3 major labels controlling something like 70% of all music, so Spotify doesn't really have a choice. They have to pay whatever they ask. It leaves them with this tiny little slice of the pie to try and cover everything else, salaries, tech, marketing, all of it. So you've got the labels squeezing them from one side, and then there's us, the consumers. We're squeezing them from the other side. And you can thank the old days of file sharing, Napster and all that for this. We've been trained to expect every song ever made, right now, on demand, for one low price. So yeah, Spotify is completely trapped between these two huge, unmovable forces. And this, right here, is the absolute key to understanding the whole problem. A lot of people compare Spotify to Netflix, but their business models are like polar opposites. See, Netflix pays a fixed cost. They make a show, and once they've made that money back, every single new subscriber is basically pure profit. But Spotify, they have variable costs. They pay the labels a cut of their revenue, so the more money they make, the more money they have to pay out. They literally can't grow their way out of this problem. What's wild is that Spotify has become the public face of the music industry, an industry that a lot of artists feel is just completely broken. They're the ones who get all the heat for low artist payouts, but it's the labels who really hold all the power. It's a terrible spot to be in. One analyst put it perfectly, saying Spotify takes all of the blame and none of the profit. So if your core business is basically a trap you can't make money from, what do? Well, you try to escape, right? And that brings us to section 2, where we see Spotify's next big moves in what I'm calling the billion-dollar escape. So, Spotify's first big escape attempt? Podcasts. And they didn't just, test the waters. No, they did a cannonball. They went all in, spending almost $1 billion buying up podcast companies left and right. The whole idea was to finally own the content, just like Netflix does, and finally break free from the stranglehold of the record labels. I mean, if you remember back between 2019 and 2021, it was just a nonstop blitz of huge deals. They bought up production studios. They signed Joe Rogan for this insane $100 million exclusive deal. Then they brought in these massive names like the Obamas and Harry and Meghan. For investors, this looked like it was it. This was their house of cards moment, that one big move that would change everything and finally make them profitable. Yeah, but that turning point, it never came. The Obamas ended up leaving for another platform. Harry and Meghan's whole podcast thing got canceled, and now Joe Rogan's show isn't even exclusive anymore. It turns out the whole strategy of using huge names to get people in the door just didn't work. It didn't give anyone a reason to stick around. That billion-dollar bet, it just didn't pay off. So what do you do when the podcast dream starts to fade? Well, if you're Spotify, you pivot. Fast. Their next big escape hatch became audiobooks. And boom, they dropped another $125 million on a publisher, hoping that this time, this new medium would be the magic bullet they'd been searching for. Okay, so Spotify's official story is that all these moves from music to podcasts to audiobooks are all just different phases of one big, brilliant, grand strategy to own all of audio. But what if that's not what's really going on? And that question brings us to section 3, a cycle of destruction. Okay, so here's the theory. The argument is that Spotify is basically running a playbook, a repeating cycle with one main goal: keep investors happy. Step one, they dump a ton of money, hundreds of millions, into whatever the next big thing is. Step two, they use their giant user base to pump up the numbers and generate some really impressive sounding stats for this new thing. And step three, this is the kicker. Before anyone has time to figure out that the new thing isn't actually making any money, they pivot again to the next big thing and sell it all as just the next part of the grand plan. Because when you really step back and ask, who actually benefits from this whole cycle? It's pretty clear it's not Spotify's bank account. Think about it. The podcast startups they bought, they got rich. All those celebrity creators they signed, they got rich. There's a quote that just sums it all up perfectly. Spotify's real core competency is generating large amounts of money for other people. So after all this spending and all this pivoting, where does that leave the company? That really is the big question, isn't it? Let's wrap things up with Section 4, what happens next? When you start looking back, you realize this whole pattern, it isn't new at all. Spotify has this long trail of failed escape attempts. I mean, they've tried merch, concert tickets, original video content. They even made a physical speaker for your car. Podcasts and audiobooks are really just the latest in a long line. And now they're apparently talking about online courses. And all of this brings us to one final huge question. After nearly 20 years of trying to escape the trap of its own music business, after this long trail of very expensive pivots, is Spotify finally running out of distractions? The company might have to face a really uncomfortable reality pretty soon, that it just might never become the super profitable tech giant that investors have always wanted it to be. The real question is, what happens then?